Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to be talking about the next installment in the original Cyberforce miniseries with Cyberforce number 3. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in May of 1993, we can see here on the cover that this issue will most certainly involve a guest appearance from none other than Dale Keown's Pitt, which is pretty cool. However, what's not that cool is the fact that the image that we're seeing here on the cover is not totally representative of exactly what's going to be happening inside of this story, spoiler alert, but, it's still pretty cool as a cover on its own nonetheless. Pencils, Mark Silvestri. Writer, Eric Silvestri. Inks, Dan Panosian, Mark Silvestri, and Trevor Scott. Letters, Mike Heisler. Colors, Joe Chiodo. Editor, Cynthia Sullivan. Color separations, Ollie Optics. We can see here on the first page that this book picks up exactly where issue 2 left off, as we see the van is now wrecked and sticking halfway out of a hole in the ground, and the three mutants who kidnapped Velocity and Timmy are realizing now that they've been set up. Wildfire in particular realizes that something is amiss, and Splitzkrieg, who, God, I will never get tired of the fact that they created a character like Splitzkrieg, I love it, is really starting to decide that they're not in for this. This isn't what they signed up for. And Slam says, go ahead, leave, see if I care. However, he is upset when Splitzkrieg decides to rip a hole through the top of the van instead of using one of the doors, even further destroying the van that they're trying to use to make a quick getaway from the scene of the crime. We're then treated to this incredibly good-looking, dare I say beautiful, 2-page splash image of Killjoy, Megawatt, and Psychotron confronting the mutants as they try to exit the vehicle, stating that they want the discs that they stole back from them. However, Slam says that's not an option as they prepare for a fight. And once again, God, the colors on this page look amazing. Shout out to Joe Chiodo and Ollie Optics for just an exquisite job. This looks so good. And once again, not printed on gloss pages either. This is a paper, I believe, is the same paper that Jim Lee was using for the original Gen 13 miniseries and Gen 13 number 0. I don't know what type of paper this is, but as I stated before, I do wish all comics to this day were still printed on it. Realizing that the mutants don't intend to just give back the disc, Killjoy decides to go ahead and press their attack as we see Megawatt unleash a burst of electricity as Wildfire and Slam dodge out of the way. We then see Slam use his powers for the first time, which is apparently to smack the ground really hard. And this opens up a fissure and creates a seismic event, a localized seismic event, I would assume, that launches Psychotron and Megawatt up into the air as they try to dodge the attack. He's then joined when Wildfire unleashes a blast of energy, and we see Splitzkrieg pick up cars that they intend to hurl at the members of Cyberdata. However, Psychotron regains his footing, unleashing a blast of plasma at one of the cars, ripping it in half, and Killjoy decides that she's had enough as she uses her super speed to grab Slam as she runs by him, and then slam him up against the wall himself, and demands that he hand over the discs. However, he says he can't because the kid ate them. And Killjoy then responds, "What kid?" We are then teleported to another part of Westchester, New York, as we see the gas station, which acts as a front for the secret hideout of none other than Cyberforce, where their base is below the surface, roughly 300 feet below the surface, and Impact and Heatwave are observing a training exercise between Ripclaw and Psyblade. Impact states that he loves watching the two of them train together as it's like watching a dance. Heatwave calls it a dance of death, and they are then suddenly interrupted by a transmission from Chip, who states that Velocity, Timmy, and their van have all mysteriously disappeared, and he fears the worst. So Heatwave tells Chip that they're going to mobilize and join him in the hunt for their friends. Also, I'd like to point out, I believe this might be the first time we've seen Psyblade and Heatwave depicted without their masks. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I believe this is it. Meanwhile, back at the fight between the mutants and Cyberdata, we see that Timmy is trying to stir Velocity awake. As she comes to, she notices that Timmy looks very bad, and he says that it's something he ate, referring to the discs that he decided to swallow to take from the mutants. He tells her that they need to get away now. Unfortunately, they are interrupted by Killjoy, who swings the back door of the van open and states that the two of them will be coming with her. She grabs Velocity and has Psychotron grab Timmy, who slings him under his arm, but does not notice that Timmy coughs up the two discs that they were after as they walk away, leaving those discs on the ground. We are then treated to an advertisement for Wizard Comics #1, Cyber Beef. I do not recall ever coming across one of these, though I might pick it up if I did. And I mean, what would an Image comic book from 1993 be without some sort of advertisement for Wizard or a Wizard affiliated product? We then see we are transported to Brooklyn, New York, as this gets back into like the subplot of Cyberforce, where there's this whole like mutant rights thing going on, and this is one of the places where like the Image shared universe kind of fell flat. It's kind of weird that, you know, all of this stuff is trying to take place in New York, but it's not referenced in all of the other books that are taking place in New York. We see here there's a reporter standing outside of a housing project that is to be torn down by the city. However, this housing project is where most of the mutant population of New York lives, and the mutants feel that they are being singled out through some sort of genetic discrimination. A fight then breaks out behind the reporter between the police and some of the mutants. She decides that she's going to sign off at this point. However, she is taken hostage by the mutant she was just trying to interview. Again, this isn't necessarily bad storytelling, even if it is a direct ripoff of the type of storytelling that X-Men was doing. But the fact that this whole mutant equality movement thing was never even addressed in the pages of other books that were supposed to be taking place in New York doesn't really make any sense. At least Spawn and Shadowhawk acknowledged that the two of them were both in the same city, and there was a little bit of crossover between the two. None of this at all. None of these mutants, none of, any mutant-involved storyline or, characters from Cyberforce are really ever talked about at all in the pages of Spawn. And it doesn't make any sense. They're all happening in the same city. They really should be, there should be more continuity there. But I don't know, for whatever reason, there isn't. And it's kind of one of the reasons why the early Image shared universe wasn't really working on a lot of levels. In another part of the city, namely Manhattan, we are then transported to Cyberdata's headquarters as we see that they now have Velocity and Timmy in their clutches as they are being approached by none other than Mother May I and Warbuck and Saburo. I know that Mother May I is not a direct copy of Mystique, but she's certainly derivative of Mystique. And Warbuck, while being somewhat of an original character, I can't really tell if he has any mutant powers or his only mutation is that he has the head of a deer. At any rate, Mother May I realizes that Velocity recognizes her, which should not be happening. And she then inquires about the discs that they wanted to retrieve. However, she's informed by one of the scientists that Timmy at some point coughed up the discs, but not before downloading all of the information and viruses that were on the discs. And he stated that he will self-destruct if they do not present the proper authorization codes to get them out of his memory banks. Mother May I, though, realizes that Timmy is the most advanced android that she's ever come across, and believes that his neural network is so similar to that of a human that her mind control powers may in fact work on him, which, for the sake of the story, I guess they do, as she begins to use them and forces Timmy to give up the information that he has stored in his memory banks. Meanwhile, Velocity is being led away by one of the guards, and she's rather distraught about being pulled away from Timmy, but also wants to speak with Mother May I and find out who she is and why she remembers her. After Cyberdata left with Timmy and Velocity, the mutants who had originally kidnapped them decide to make way back to their hideout. Somehow they were able to get the mostly dilapidated van back to the warehouse that they're holed up in. As they exit the van, they realize that they're all tired. They want to kick back, have a few beers, and get some rest. However, they're greeted by an unfamiliar face asleep on their couch. Wildfire asks who that is. Slam replies, "That's Pitt. He needed a place to crash, and he's not the type of guy you say no to." Meanwhile, the Cyberforce team has picked up Chip, and they are following the transmitter that was in the van, trying to discover exactly what happened to Velocity and Timmy. Of course, they have a jet that's remarkably similar to the X-Jet from X-Men. Go figure. And they realize that they're getting close to the signal and it's getting very strong, so they decide to land and see the van inside the warehouse. Heatwave decides to take recon point as he flies up and makes his way toward the van. The other members start to scout around when Ripclaw realizes that there's something awry here and that the footprints here don't add up and that something is wrong, and believes that this might be a setup as he radios to Heatwave to get out of there immediately. However, Heatwave does not act fast enough and is caught in an explosion as the van just bursts into flames. We're then treated to this gorgeous 2-page vertical, thanks a whole lot, Mark, splash image as Pitt is awoken by the explosion and comes out of the warehouse, as we see Impact running towards the explosion, trying to find out if Heatwave is okay. However, when he sees Pitt, he realizes that this is not going to be a really good day for him and the team, as Pitt is standing over the unconscious body of Heatwave. Impact, understandably believes that Pitt is somehow responsible for this as he charges into battle. As Pitt realizes that he's got someone coming at him, he decides that he's going to take the fight to this guy, as the two of them don't know what's going on and are just, caught in a situation that neither one of them really wanted to be in. We then see an advertisement for Deathmate Black. As I've stated in past videos, I'll eventually get around to making videos about Deathmate. It's just not super high on my priority list, but they will happen at some point or another. Meanwhile, back in the battle, we see that Ripclaw and Psyblade are jumping into action as they realize they're being attacked from above by none other than Killjoy, Psychotron, Megawatt, and an entire contingent of shock troops. I'd like to point out, pay attention to the fact that Megawatt is in this scene, because this is the only point at which he's depicted in the rest of this battle. He just suddenly disappears after this shot. I don't know why, probably just because Mark Silvestri forgot that he drew him jumping out of this dropship and never drew him in another point as the rest of this battle continues on the next few pages. We then see that the fight between Pitt and Impact is getting underway as Impact lunges forward and catches Pitt with a huge punch to the face. However, he realizes instantaneously that he has made a grave mistake as he notices that the look Pitt is giving him is very similar to the look that he receives from Ripclaw when Ripclaw feels that it's time for him to go in for the kill during their training sessions. We then see that Impact is launched through the wall of the building, presumably from an attack by Pitt. I feel like this is a really good point at which they're trying to illustrate that Pitt is essentially supposed to be the Incredible Hulk of the Image shared universe, which makes sense given that he's, drawn by Dale Keown, and Dale was coming right out of his run on the Incredible Hulk during this time, drawing a character who's very similar. It was never supposed to be hidden, but I feel like they do a really good job of showing that, even attacks from super strong characters like Impact have little to no effect on Pitt at all. Also, I feel like for some reason, Impact really reminds me a lot of Malibu from the first season of American Gladiators. If that's too deep of a cut or too obscure of a reference for those of you who are watching, I do apologize. We then see Cyblade rush to the aid of Heatwave, wondering if he's okay as he slowly starts to get up off the ground. She realizes that he's conscious, but he's in no condition to fight. However, before she can help him in any way, she is attacked from behind by a blast from none other than Psychotron. However, upon witnessing all of this happen, Pitt realizes that the members of Cyberforce are probably the good guys in this scenario. So he jumps forward and punches Psychotron, launching him through the air. However, after this happens, we see Killjoy reprimand him and tell him to stay out of it, to mind his own business. But Pitt tells her that when a car bomb goes off in the building that he's sleeping on, it becomes his business. Killjoy doesn't take kindly to this as she launches a barrage of super speed attacks against Pitt. Unfortunately for her, Pitt's durability and strength are far too much for her to overcome despite the veracity that she's attacking him with. And then she's interrupted by a tap on her shoulder from none other than Slam, who has decided to settle the score with her as he launches her through the air. And we then see Psychotron gaining his balance again and launching another attack at Cyblade, who is easily able to dodge it this time, knowing that he's coming for her in this instance. After dodging Psychotron's attack, Cyblade mounts a counteroffensive, launching one of her psionic blades at him, cutting him on the shoulder. Meanwhile, the shock troops have their hands full as they are trying to deal with an assault from Ripclaw and Pitt. The two of them seem to have an instant kinship as Pitt realizes that, Ripclaw is a warrior who fights with honor, and he's very happy to be doing battle by his side. And this is kind of where I was talking about at the beginning of the video, where, the image of Ripclaw jumping onto Pitt's back and attacking him is not indicative of anything we're seeing on the interior of this book, as the two of them are clearly fighting side by side. After the battle starts to subside a little, Pitt realizes that Chip is standing on the sideline and seems very worried, so he walks over to talk to him, also casually tossing one of the shock troops over his head. And we then see that Cyblade believes that Chip is about to die, but Ripclaw assures her that Pitt is on their side. And Pitt leans down to talk to Chip and realizes that he is very worried for his friend Timmy. Pitt states that he also seeks someone by the name of Timmy, kind of implying that this crossover event is happening, I guess, right after Pit number 1, between Pit number 1 and number 2. It's not explicitly stated at any point that that's the case, but given the timeline events of the Pit series, that's the only spot that it would logically fit. We then see that Wildfire has had enough of all this commotion as she steps out of the warehouse and states that, all of this fighting is fine and dandy, but she wants everybody to get the hell out of her house. After the battle has subsided, we see the Cyberforce team conversing with Chip as he states that the whole thing was a setup from the beginning, where basically the mutants were hired by Saburo to steal the discs initially. However, he then sent the shock troops and cyber data to go and steal the discs from the mutants. That way the authorities would be after the mutants and have no idea that any of this was, perpetrated by cyber data as an organization. We see then that Cyblade states she wonders what's on that disc, but Chip is more concerned about where Velocity and Timmy are, as we see Ripclaw looking on to the horizon, thinking to himself that everyone's really kind of worried about what's happening to their friends and if they're okay. I'd also like to point out that despite being 3 feet away from a car bomb when it exploded, that Heatwave seems none the worse for wear. There's not even a rip on his clothing or a scratch on his face. Pretty impressive that he suffered no damage despite, a massive explosion that he was standing directly next to. And really, that could be said for the rest of the team as well. They have no evident damage from the battle that they just took place in, despite the fact that some of them were depicted as having battle damage during the actual battle. Bit of a continuity error there between one panel and the next. It happens, but I really kind of wish Mark had paid a little bit more attention to that. Meanwhile, we are then transported into a place that was long ago and far away, as we see Velocity depicted as a child walking into a room where she sees her sister asleep and her mother sitting on the bed. Velocity states that her sister told her that she didn't want to be there anymore, and that's why she left them. However, her mother states that she just had to leave, and Velocity wants to go with her, but her mother says that she has to stay here and go back to bed. We then see a large bit of fire and explosion happening outside of the window as Velocity wonders what's wrong. Her mother tells her to go back to bed and that she has to leave. However, Velocity then pleads with her mom to stay, as she doesn't want her to go, as she sees her mother go out the window into the fire, and she reaches out her hand screaming, "No, no, please come back." Then back in the real world, we see Velocity shoot awake, screaming from the nightmare that she just had. Timmy asks her if it was a bad dream. She says yes, and it's one that is a recurring nightmare for her. However, it seems to get more and more real every time she has it, and she wonders what's going on. Timmy states that it's time for them to make an escape, as he reaches out and is able to unlock the doors as he memorized the sound that the buttons on the keypad make while they were locking him and Velocity inside of this cell. Velocity is rather impressed by his abilities and states that if word ever got out about Timmy and what he could do, that everyone would want one of him. The two of them begin to make their escape as they start to slowly sneak through the hallways of Cyberdata headquarters. And then they come up across a room that is inhabited by Mother May I, Saburo, and a technician who are all talking about the plans that they have for Velocity and stating that they're going to have to wipe her memory again and implant something called a box. Velocity is overhearing all of this and also witnesses an image on screen of her murdering someone by shooting them. We then see that, Saburo and Mother May I are standing next to each other. Mother May I stating that all of this needs to happen so that Velocity can be under their control once again within a few days. Velocity doesn't like the sound of any of this, as she tells Timmy that they need to make a run for it and get out of Cyberdata headquarters immediately. Later that evening, we see an image of the Statue of Liberty, and we see also that Mother May I is standing on the rooftop of Cyberdata, conversing with Saburo, stating that she had another conversation with the lady in the harbor once again. However, Saburo seems to be a little disillusioned by the strange connection and fabricated conversations that Mother May I is having with the Statue of Liberty, as she basically explains to him that the statue has told her to step out and stand alone like she does, holding a torch in her hand with a spiky hairdo. Saburo states that he doesn't understand what Mother May I is talking about, as we see her step into an elevator with Warbuck. She responds to Saburo stating that nobody does, that the only person who understands what's truly happening is her, as the elevator doors close. Meanwhile, back in Brooklyn, we see that the SWAT team has showed up as the hostage negotiations are ongoing after the reporter was kidnapped by the mutants. They're held up in a building. They have some guns, and the police seem as though they're about to just, give up on all the negotiations and just let some snipers handle the mutants inside and potentially just go in guns blazing. When they are interrupted by a car that slams through the barricades, we see that Stryker is nearby, and it was never stated at any point that he was nearby before this, but here he is, witnesses this, and pulls off his trench coat, revealing his other arms and some guns underneath the coat. He realizes that this is the car of Mother May I, and he is shocked that she has shown up to this scene, as most of these police officers would have no problem putting a bullet in her head. She yells from inside that they have to make it inside of the building and then they'll be safe. As Warbuck jumps out and opens fire on the police line, we see that Mother May I keeps her head down and tries to make for the door. However, Warbuck is shot by the police, and we then see Stryker jump in, starting to open fire on the police as well, as he throws Mother May I onto the ground and tells her to keep her head down so that the same thing doesn't happen to her. After the three of them are able to make their way into the building, we see that Mother May I is fine, but Warbuck needs help walking as he is slung over the shoulder of Stryker. Mother May I scolds Malone for taking the reporter hostage. The mutant known as Malone, though, states that he doesn't need her help anymore. He's a big boy now. As we see that Stryker turns around and continues to lay down suppressing fire on the police line. They're really kind of discombobulated at this point, not certain what to do. As we then see a tear gas round burst through the window of the building and hit down onto the ground. Stryker realizes that they need to get out of here, so Mother May I tells them that they need to get to the elevator. Stryker then starts to open fire on the police who are pouring into the building. However, in his thought bubble, we are then, given the information that he's using something called high velocity stun rounds, which are, for all intents and purposes made to look and act as real bullets. However, they don't do any permanent damage, but they will, put someone on their butt for a minute. We see that Mother May I and Warbuck are trying to get to the elevator. Stryker tells her to go ahead, that he'll cover them and hold the police back for as long as he can. He then tells Malone to let the reporter go. However, Malone states that he has no intention of doing so. So Stryker responds by pistol whipping Malone with all three of his right arms. The reporter then thanks Stryker for getting her out of this jam and states that she owes him one. He says good, and that she can repay him right now by telling everyone that Malone decided to just let her go. She's confused by this, but he tells her that mutants don't need any more bad press in the media than they already have, and that, he really needs her to do a solid for him and the rest of the mutant population. We then see Stryker making his way through the tear gas as he joins Mother May I and the rest of the group in the elevator, and is surprised to learn that somehow the mutants have their own power source that they're tapping into as she hits the button and closes the doors. With a few button presses, we see that the elevator then decouples from the cables that it's suspended from and starts to hurl downward into the floor, as the rest of the mutants inside seem a little bit terrified. But Mother May I and Warbuck know exactly what's happening, as the story ends and is to be continued in Cyberforce number 4, which will feature a special foil embossed cover. Unfortunately for all of us, because this image actually looks all right. However, the foil embossed version of this image doesn't look nearly as good as this, as you will see when I make a video on Cyberforce number 4. We're then treated to a small letter section. Someone sent in a cool little artwork that they did of Ripclaw. It looks pretty neat, and it's cool that they were printing that kind of stuff up. Most of these letters are nothing important, but before we get to those, I'd like to point out the advertisement on the reverse inside cover for Bow and Board. Nothing special here. We've seen this multiple times with multiple different characters featured. But the reason I wanted to talk about that first was because, getting back to the letter section, there is a point where someone asks what the little small comics that they've seen in some comic book stores and conventions are and why they're out there. They're treated to a response stating that those little things are ash cans, which were originally promotional things that were handed out by comic book companies. And they gained the moniker of ash can because generally that's where they wound up. And after reading this, I realized that there were probably some of you who may be watching that don't know what an ash can is. And I started looking through the few ash cans that I do have and found out that I actually have the ash can for this very issue, and it looks like this. You can see here that it is just a smaller version of the regular comic. This one having an all orange cover and allegedly signed by Mark Silvestri. I have no way to verify if this signature is real or not. I bought this book with several other ash cans. I actually have an ash can for issue number 2 of the miniseries that I completely forgot about, and issue number 0 as well. Honestly, there's nothing really special about these other than the fact that they exist. I don't know how many of these were printed per issue, or if they all have the exact same colored covers. I know the ash cans for the Max came in like 5 or 6 different color options if you could find them. But the interior of the book is literally identical. The only difference being that everything's in black and white. There's no color whatsoever. And all of the places where there were advertisements in the, retailer version are just advertisements for Cyberforce and Codename Strikeforce inside of the ash can. They're cool little collectible things. I don't know really what the value of them is at this point. I mean, I think I paid maybe like $10 a pop for the ones that I got a few years ago. And I just bought them because I think they're cool. I don't know that there's any real like high level collector value to any of this stuff, but they are a fun little thing to have. And, it is a neat thing to show people once in a while. And now that I'm doing these videos, I'm actually kind of glad I have one, as it allows me to show it to all of you watching. And that was Cyberforce number 3. Overall, despite the few continuity errors that take place within the story, I think it's pretty decent as a whole. The Pit cameo was cool, despite the fact that it wasn't really necessary in any way. It's still nice to see the little crossover event between some Image characters, and I think they did a really good job of showcasing and, giving an explanation to really illustrate how strong Pit is by comparison to some of the other characters in the Image universe. And once again, I can't say enough about how good the colors look in this book. It was just top-notch work by Joe Chiodo and Ollie Optics. The color separation was amazing. Everything popped beautifully. I love it more than anything to see books that looked this good. And I really wish, it was a level of quality that we could see across the board throughout the industry, despite the fact that that's not realistically possible, especially with a lot of lower budget independent titles. But these are just my opinions. Your opinions may differ, and if they do, that's okay. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.